You got lost souls redefining what's wrong and what's right. Blind men unable to tell between darkness and light.
Welcome to the Shining Light Podcast. This is Pastor Sam.
And Patrick, no compromises, evil Wyett.
And today we're going to continue looking at the new normal for the COVID-19 virus or coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. Wars. It was called wars originally, right? That was kind of one thing.
We like that one. That one works.
Right. And we're going to continue just looking at this new normal. We had part one. If you haven't seen part one, go ahead and check out part one. It's pretty foundational. Although this is, this is going to be a standalone also, but there's good information there in part one. So I think you should check it out. But if you need to find out where to check it out, theshininglightministries.com. Once again, it's theshininglightministries.com. But when we're talking about the coronavirus here, COVID-19, one thing that we're hearing quite a bit is it's just temporary, just stay in place. It's just temporary. Warm weather's coming. And then it starts snowing where we're from. But warm weather's coming. It's Iowa. We will get to warm weather eventually, but will warm weather really take care of this virus, Patrick?
Well, we have some warm areas in this country right now where the virus is doing pretty well amongst the population. In New Orleans, they're getting hit pretty hard. There's in Florida, out in California, down in Arizona, where the temperatures, I checked a couple of weeks ago, were hitting mid-80s up to 90 degrees. So, and in Australia, they've had an outbreak too. So it doesn't appear that warm weather adversely affects it. I mean, I wish it were. They said warm, humid weather. Well, boy, that would fix us in the summer. But they're saying that no, maybe not the case. And as we were talking last podcast, naturally occurring viruses have a tendency to wane during the summer or go away completely as they do their work. This one doesn't appear to be having that so far, which again leads me to believe it's not naturally occurring. It's a recombinant virus. It was put together for a purpose, and the purpose is what we're going to be getting into, and even what we're seeing right now, economically, globally, politically, all these things. There's a purpose here, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But the unfortunate thing is, you notice they're saying, well, when they put these declarations out of well, we'll open back up in 2 weeks. Well, we're going to extend that another 2 weeks. Well, now we're going to extend it again. So they didn't want to tell you maybe what they knew in the first place all along, but now they are kind of talking about, some people are saying, well, we may have to be locked down for 6, 8, 12, or 18 months. And of course, nobody wants to hear that.
No.
And, our quite frankly, our nation can't survive that. The economy is about to die. It's dying for a lot of people right now. Mm-hmm. Businesses are going to be shuttered. We'll get into that here in a minute. But there appears to be no let up. This is a synthetic virus. I will postulate and say that it is.
Yeah. So
what's the truth?
Yeah. Well, can I play off that for just a little bit too?
Uh-huh.
So let's just say we're wrong here for a moment. Here, we'll play devil's advocate and we'll say that we're wrong. And this is a natural virus, okay? And in everything. Now, I don't think it is. I think it's a synthetically made virus, but we'll go ahead and
that's just our opinion. We don't know for sure.
Right, but we'll say that we're wrong. Will warm weather take care of it? Well, if it is a naturally made virus, the virus that it should most similarly mimic would be the SARS virus, right?
Yeah, it got components of SARS, certainly, yes.
Right. So that would be the one that it would be closest to, would be the SARS virus. Well, if you remember this, the epicenter was in Toronto, at least in the Western Hemisphere here. What was in Toronto? And what ended up happening is the warmer weather came, it took care of everything, but then there was a second outbreak in Toronto, and it's because of the climate-controlled hospitals that also have infectious surfaces. So even if warm weather comes, which 86 degrees is supposed to be that secret sauce special degree that it works, it still doesn't save us because we like things in the Western hemisphere called air conditioning. And so New York would probably have a second outbreak, even if this is a natural virus, and they're probably going to get hit hard a second time. And so that would be a pretty big issue. And so warm weather isn't necessarily our savior because we have climate-controlled places with infectious surfaces. So even if we're wrong on that sense, we're still right. I like it when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of the world too.
This happens, I guess I'd rather be wrong.
Yeah, I would too. But there's parts of the world that are not going to be hitting that magic 86 degrees. There's northern areas of the country, Canada, these places, in Europe and in Russia and places where they don't have really warm summers, right? Alaska, maybe some places. So it never really goes away in those areas if that's the case, right? It stays there. And then as the cold weather advances, then it would advance with the cold weather. It would start coming back up again. People travel and communicate and in person. So yeah, that's an ongoing problem. And that's kind of what they're gearing up with some of the solutions for the problem. But we talked about this the last one, the last podcast. So what's the truth on this? The government knows, the scientists know. And you say, well, this guy was an epidemiologist. He said this was naturally occurring, that this, and this will happen. You go, okay, he's an epidemiologist, so he's certainly in a position to know. That's like listening to a former CIA guy. Yeah, he's in the intelligence community. He's certainly in a position to know. But does it suit his purposes? Does he have an agenda, or does he want to tell you the truth? That's always the thing we need to look at. Are we being told the truth by people that do know? Or do they have agenda and they're lying to us because that fits their agenda?
Right. And, I was just listening to Steve Deace last night, and he brought up this phrase, and I thought this phrase was pretty important to understanding and deciphering and discerning the world here. And that is, where does the position or the knowledge end? The expertise, that's what he said. Where does the expertise end and the worldview begin? And
way of putting it.
Right. And right now, that's really the question that we're asking. You ask, what is the truth? And you also talked about some time frames. They said 2 weeks. Well, I'm going to encourage everybody to do this crazy thing that nobody likes to do in America anymore. And that is, don't just listen with your ears. Okay. I know you can't see my ears right now, but don't just listen with your ears. Also go and read the actual statements that are being made, because let me give you an example of our governor. Our governor, or maybe I should say Emperor Supreme, Kim Reynolds, but we'll get more into that kind of stuff later. She came out and she said in a press conference, I'm declaring a state of emergency, all this and that, and it's going to be for 2 weeks. It's going to be for 2 weeks. Well, it's been—
That was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That was a month ago, wasn't it?
Right. That was a month ago. But if you read her original statement, she gave herself a month. And then after the 2 weeks, she went and extended it a month from that 2 weeks. So 2 weeks has turned into a minimum of 6 weeks here. And I looked out. Right. Well, and I looked out at people and I just kept telling them, I said, well, look at what she said here. It's at minimum going to be a month. And I said, more likely it's going to be at least 6 to 8 weeks. And right now we seem to be on that path. Right now, and it could be much longer than that 6 to 8 weeks too. But I would just encourage people to read right now so that they can kind of see the actual actions of what's happening and what the government is doing, so that we can see the truth that they know and read their actions rather than just their words.
Well, I just, we were doing the first podcast, because we're doing these back to back. So it's going to take you maybe a week or I don't know how long. We may put them out in pretty short order so you can get them. But there's a proclamation, I don't know if you're aware of this, just a while ago from the governor. She's announced more stringent restrictions on northeastern Iowa. That was just, Janet just showed me that a bit ago on the phone.
Right. Districts.
That was like breaking news while we were doing the podcast.
Yeah, I saw that also. District 6, it's like we're in the Hunger Games right now. Which district are we in? But our district, we're not even supposed to go over to people's houses if you're not of the same household right now. It's, which does
that affect us then right now? I mean, this is all new to me too, as I just saw the headlines, so maybe you know more about it.
So I saw it in her press conference at 11. I haven't read the official document yet. I've been waiting to see that be published, so I'm not totally sure. In the press conference, she did use words of suggestion, but then she also used words like this is an extension of what was previously there. What was previously there, if you disobeyed that, it was a misdemeanor. So it was an actual crime to go against that. So I'm not really sure. It'll be interesting to see how it's enforced. We'll find out. Probably by the time this is out, we'll have a much better idea as to what it is. If you find us in jail, you'll know we got it wrong. But I will say that being in Iowa, we are still blessed pretty well. Although we've got the lighter chains of tyranny right now compared to like our friends out in California. Sorry, Jeff. Some
other areas of the country are taking it worse. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, this is a perfect segue into what we're talking about. So what are the political and economic results of this pandemic? And of course, that means we're seeing the transition now from what was normal to the topic here, the new normal.
Right. Well, which one should we start with, the political or economic? Because I mean, we might have to do a third episode of this because there's a lot to go over with this guy.
Yeah, there is. Okay. So, well, what we were just talking about, a declared state of emergency, and that's, the president talks about it, and we're going to really go into depth on this sort of thing from the lawful side of things. But it's kind of opened a door for a lot of wannabe dictators, from governors down to mayors, down to city council members, to county commissioners and county supervisors, making their own declarations, somehow thinking because there's a state of declaration declared that they can start issuing decrees to lock down and control the people for their own good. And anytime you hear the government saying this is for your own good, boy, you better be ready to go, because that is always an indication that tyranny is on top of you.
Right. So, well, and I think we need to understand that the premise too of our government was our government, one, as it was founded. Okay. Obviously it looks like it's a little different today than what it was founded as. Was it founded as valuing safety above freedom, or did it come from a different premise?
Well, Ben Franklin said those that would give up essential liberty for promised security deserve neither liberty or security. So that was a warning from one of our founding fathers, even, at the time and before we were a nation. And always the idea in the founder's mind was the greatest threat to the individual in a country is their own government. I mean, you can be invaded, of course, and being taken over by another country, but if that's not the case, there's a constant battle between freedom and government. Government is the natural enemy of freedom.
Right.
George Washington said that government is not eloquence, it's not reason, it's force, like fire, a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And that's just history. That's the way it always is. So the founders, in their great wisdom and love for liberty, decided to chain government and put restrictions on government and make government by the people, for the people, and of the people. That was their intent. That's what they set up. But we've lost our way over 240 years. We've got a population that became otherwise caught up in things that they wanted to do and distracted away. And we lost our Christian foundation. And that was really the key right there. And we became self-centered. And here we are today. We're looking at a document that's still in full force, but nearly completely ignored in actual practice by government officials, statutory laws. And more sad than that, the people of this country accept it because they don't know any better.
Right. So how we got this document that you talked about, the Constitution, obviously we know of the Declaration of Independence, but before we got the Constitution, the people of America needed to be convinced, because we had the Articles of Confederation. And so three guys got together and they wrote these papers, the Federalist Papers. And I've been reading the Federalist Papers here, and Federalist number 8 was the one that I read today. And it really goes over this idea that the dangers of war. If we went, and instead of becoming a federal government, if we went and we were all these separate states or 3 or 4 different confederacies between the 13 colonies, there would be constant war between us, and what some of the issues would be. And let me just read a couple of them to you, because a couple of quotes here. This is from Alexander Hamilton, because really when you put it in context of, if you take out war and you put in this idea of a war against a virus, we can see kind of exactly what's happening here.
We want to listen to Hamilton because he's on the $10 bill.
That's right. That's right. Well, and you already listed, the guy on the 100, Franklin. So
yeah. So there's $120 right there.
Yeah.
Oh, $110.
Well, I'm giving 2 quotes, so that's 120.
There you go. $10 a quote. Go ahead.
There you go. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free.
The risk, right?
Right. The risk of being less free. Think about that. In order to be more safe, we run the risk of being less free. Would you say that's what's happening today, Patrick?
I would definitely say that's what's happening, and it's being justified again for our own good, for the public good. We're doing it. Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Reagan said those were some of the most dangerous words in human language when you put, the most dangerous sentence. So anyway.
Yeah, so let me read this quote too, because I think this is happening in the political culture, and it's something that is going to be part of the new normal here. It says that they would at the same time be necessitated to strengthen the executive arm of the government, in doing which their constitutions would acquire a progressive direction toward monarchy. It is the nature of war to increase the executive at the expense of the legislative authority. Now, I don't think we're necessarily going to get a king right now, but really what I want to focus in on is that idea of that increase the executive at the expense of the legislative branch, or legislative authority is what it says. What would be the issue of having a greater executive branch, or so much more authority in the executive branch, and diminishing the legislative branch, branch's authority?
The executive branch is the branch that's tasked with actually administering the law. They're the law enforcement. So the legislative branch makes the law, but the executive branch enforces the law. Now, you give undue power to the executive branch, they start deciding how they're going to enforce the law, or how their law is going to be interpreted, much like what the judiciary is trying to do. The judiciary doesn't have enforcement powers. They can give opinions, but they don't have that enforcement power. The executive branch does. So they're in charge of the military, they're in charge in your state police, law enforcement. So when a governor or a president or a mayor, in their area of jurisdiction, they have enforcement powers. They're going to enforce the law. What you're having when you give them the authority to do so, which is unconstitutional, to go beyond the Constitution, is they get to issue decrees, and those decrees have the force of law, and then they get to execute their own decrees. And there's not recourse. Right now there is. I guess you can file a lawsuit. Then we'll get into some of these other things here in a minute of where this is going, but the new normal is right now, you have mayors now giving harder or tougher orders than what the governors are or other people. You've got all these little petty dictator type people that now they've let their power go to their head, and they think that they can start issuing decrees like they're the president or somebody else, and that they can lock down their people and do different things. And this is very troubling. It really shows the nature and the character of a man or a woman when you start giving them, or they start seizing more power than what's actually a part of the job description, and see what they do with it.
Right. And on the state level and on the national level too, the legislative branch is closer in power to the people. So the people have more control over the legislative branch of government, or theoretically, that's how it's set up anyway. And so when they start to give away power, it is a further down the road and farther removed from the people themselves voting in the executive branch. It is still closer than the judicial branch, which is the furthest removed from the people, but it is further than the legislative branch. So once again, we see the power being taken away from the people. And so we're no longer, as people, which is declared in the Declaration of Independence, we allow our governing authorities to govern us, is how the America is supposed to work. We're no longer doing that. Now we're becoming more subjects instead of citizens.
Exactly what was the cause of contention in the first Revolutionary War, to separate us. So we have that going on. Of course, we're seeing that, and we're seeing it all over the place. Whether it's happening in your neighborhood, you're at least seeing on the news what they're doing. We'll get into a little bit more of that here in a bit too. But the second thing we're seeing, both locally, statewide, nationwide, and globally, is the world economy is being crushed right now. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the Bible and you say, well, what would be the conditions where this Antichrist, who will come upon the scene, I mean, why would people give away their sovereignty the way the world's going today? And the answer is they wouldn't. That's why we have this new normal coming. You crush economies, people are out of jobs, their businesses are closing, people that put their everything into small business, their businesses are not going to be able to survive, some of them, and that's sad to say. Big businesses are cutting back. Automobiles are not selling right now. The housing market is going to, everything is down. Like, people are not thinking luxury or entertainment. A lot of people are starting to think survival mode, long term. How do I survive this? Where am I going to work? These are very concerning things for people. People are even committing suicide at this point. I've got the virus, they commit suicide, I'm worried about my job. All the pressures of the world, and you throw this on top of them. So collapsing the world economy is a major step towards collapsing borders of nations and calling for a global solution to what they're presenting to us as a global problem. And here we have the United Nations, an entity that was put together for one world governments at some point. And of course, they're calling the shots. The WHO, we were talking a little bit about that. The guy that's president of that is a Chinese collaborator. I mean, it's plain as day. they're not an organization that's truthful either. They have an agenda and they're part of a larger agenda. But so the crushing of the economy, what's going on right now with people out of work, and they push a $2.5 trillion stimulus package to put our national debt to 25 trillion, which is an unfathomable number that can never be paid back, and talking about spending more money. Where's all this money coming from? They're going to give us a pittance of the money they steal from us, and they don't have any money. They're a bankrupt entity, 25 trillion in debt. Are you kidding me? They're going to keep me propped up. But it's their ideas of shutting down the economy, and I realize from a standpoint that it's probably saved some people to this point, and people are dying. But the fact of the matter is, the virus is going to kill some people. What's the reaction to our reaction as far as the government's concerned? It's killing a nation. It's killing a way of life. It's killing capitalism.
Right.
I mean, you can't be sustained, and this is global. Like stuff's not being made, stuff's not being shipped, all this kind of stuff. So the cure, so-called, to flatten the curve, that's a word they like to use, flatten the curve, as far as, and I understand, overwhelming the healthcare system is a bad thing and more people will die. Yeah. Do you destroy a nation? At what point do you say that this is wrong?
Right. Well, overwhelming a health system is terrible, but what we're doing right now is even worse, because we're going to be destroying our economy. And as we've been mentioning, and people say, oh, you care more about money than you care about life. No, it's the reality of it is that food does have a value behind it. So would we rather die of the coronavirus or slowly starve to death? And people laugh at that because they go, I can always go to McDonald's. Well, there's going to be a food shortage. I know some of you are saying that McDonald's isn't real food.
Death by McDonald's.
Right. Well, but I mean, they're talking about food shortages already coming in the next few months because of Tyson's being hit. And also in that, the update, I don't know if you saw this from earlier today, the Tyson's in Blackhawk County has a suspected outbreak. And so they're sending tests over there today. So I'm assuming in at least a half a week, maybe a week, we'll find out that we have even higher numbers here in Iowa. So we haven't even peaked yet here in Iowa.
Well, meatpacking plants are being shut down. You have basically half of our economy, as far as the food industry goes, people are eating their food, about 50% of it, at restaurants, resorts, cruise ships, all this sort of thing. So you have a lot of people that are contracted to produce food to supply these outlets. These outlets are now shut down. So the farmers don't, because of legal reasons or whatever, they don't have the ability to turn around and say, well, now we're going to start putting the food in the grocery stores. Milk is being dumped out right now. The cows still have to be milked, but the milk's being dumped out. Vegetables are being plowed under. They're rotting in the fields. There's no market for them. They can't get them to market. They can't package them correctly. There's not that capacity. So that's devastating. We're losing food right now and not being able to get out and replenish this food, or livestock animals that would become food. I read a report they're going to have to start euthanizing them. The economy is screwed up right now from all this stuff going on. The legal stuff on how you would get it repackaged and sent out is not working. So we lose all that capacity. People still eat every day. They still need to eat. That doesn't go away.
Right.
It's a real problem setting itself up. Then you have locust swarm, another big one, about 3 times the size of one that went from Northern Africa and across the Middle East into Asia. Another one is now on the rise. And you've got all these different things, weather conditions happening. It's a very real threat. And I know this is not what people want to hear, especially now that the grocery stores, at least in our area, are somewhat normal now, that the first wave of panic, people must have thought they got enough food, and I hope they do. But if this is not addressed, this becomes a worse problem.
Right. And just to talk about that idea of the farm animals, I was talking with my parents here, because they generally go and order a half of a cow or a quarter of a cow at a time. Because you have to, the most or the least you can do is a quarter of a cow. It's all regulations as to why you can do that straight from the farmer. But the farmer called him up and they said, okay, so we're going in at this time. This is when it's going to happen. And he is only able to go get one cow slaughtered. My parents happen to be one of the people who ordered a quarter of a cow there. And they're sitting there talking to him about this, because I said, hey, we'd like to get in on this. He goes, no, it's not that I don't have a cow that can't be slaughtered. It's I can't get into the slaughterhouse to go and get this cow. And that's the issue. It's not this idea that we don't have necessarily the resources right now. The problem is that we shut down our economy, we shut down our markets, and there is repercussions from that. It's not just a bunch of fake numbers. It has real life implications for people. and that $2.5 trillion fund money that we just threw out there, how crazy was that? You know, you talk about $25 trillion debt. Well, that's just our national debt. That's not counting the $14 trillion consumer debt that we have. So really, you're pushing it now up to about $40 million or $40 trillion, not million, $40 trillion debt that we have in the nation here of the United States between people and our government. We're in a really bad spot when it comes to this, and they're talking about doing more stimulus packages.
Yeah, the economy's not coming back, so they're just going to keep making our debt worse. It's a problem that they're causing and exacerbating, making worse. Again, you're at a point where there's no good solutions, right? Either the virus is going to be affecting more people directly, or you try to slow it down and you destroy an economy, which is destroy the nation. But as the economy is collapsing and you have all these different things, we're seeing this right now too. Here's some of the other effects. We just talked about it. Our loss of freedom. So we have curfews in some places. Baltimore wants to have drones enforcing 24-hour curfew going over the city of Baltimore now.
What?
This is like Chinese stuff. This is like, hardcore communist stuff. You have arrest of protesters in North Carolina. 100 people gathered telling the governor, hey, open our state back up so we can get back to work. The police showed up and said that, disperse, or because you're violating the executive order that doesn't allow people to come together. And the police actually tweeted, protest is non-essential. What? I guess the First Amendment no longer applies. We'll get to that in just a second. And then, of course, in some places, they're ticketing and threatening churchgoers. They ticketed churchgoers in Mississippi, and they were out in the parking lot in their cars with their windows rolled up, and the cops roll up, and they start giving them tickets. Now, this is nothing more than totalitarian police state tactics. The government, under no circumstance, even a declaration of emergency, cannot, and that was my question, martial law, can the Constitution be suspended? They're acting like it has been. The question is, Sam, can it lawfully, does the Constitution provide when it can lawfully be suspended and ignored?
I don't think it does it?
Article 1, Section 9. Now, it's interesting. What does Article 1 do? Article 1 assigns the duties of Congress. It sets up the Congress and assigns their duties. So this is dealing with the legislative branch. Article 1, Section 9 says that the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended during a time of rebellion or invasion.
Yeah, yes.
It's in the best interest of the people. Okay, so the writ of habeas corpus is that, like, my corpse has rights, or, what does habeas corpus mean? It's Latin. It's a Latin word.
It's Greek to me.
It means, obviously, that you cannot be detained without charges being filed against you. You can't be put in indefinite detainment, arrested, jailed, imprisoned, without charges being presented for you, and you have a right to face your accuser and go to trial to determine if there's a crime been committed or not. The Article 1, Section 9 allows for the suspension of that during a rebellion, which the way they're moving, they're trying to look like pushes towards a rebellion, or an invasion. Well, right now we're not being invaded by an army, and that's what they were talking about. They weren't talking about viruses. Well, it could be. Let's look at what the founders wrote and said and what they ratified. We're not being invaded, and there is no rebellion. And that was just the writ of habeas corpus. The Constitution, in short, cannot be suspended. A governor, the president, cannot say, well, you know what, because for the public good, churches need to be shut down. That is tyranny. That's going way beyond their powers. And if we accept that, we're accepting the fact that they can overrule the Constitution by decree, and that they can limit and take away our First Amendment rights. First Amendment, the very first part of it says, Congress shall make no law, again, legislative Congress. They're the only ones that can. So even if there were a declaration, it has to be made by Congress, not a mayor, not a governor, not a president. Congress has to make a declaration. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, that is, as we know from prior podcasts, making a state religion like the Methodist or the Baptist being the state religion in the United States, respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Pastor Sam, if people are told they cannot come to church, is that not the classic definition of prohibiting the free exercise thereof?
Yes, it is. And I'm glad you asked me that question, because one thing I've had thrown at me about 732 million times is, maybe not quite that many, but
131 million.
Yeah, right. Is this idea of, well, they canceled religious services across the board, and it's not just churches. They're telling this here, you're not supposed to have, sports games either. And so it's not, they're not going after religion. It's not prohibiting religious liberty. And so I go and I look at them and I say, well, just because you have equal religion, just because the mosques and the Christian churches and the Jewish synagogues are all being treated the same, and they're all being treated as you can't have it, doesn't make it religious freedom. That just makes it equal tyranny. That's all.
Prohibiting the free exercise thereof is exactly what we're talking about. And that's what
Right.
government is specifically forbidden from doing.
Right. Well, in the next phrase, then in the First Amendment, it goes and it starts talking about the right to peaceably assemble in the freedom of the press. And then it also talks about, I guess the next phrase is the freedom of the press, but then it goes and it talks about the right to peaceably assemble.
Freedom of speech, freedom of press, peaceful assembly for a redress of grievances against your government.
Now, what was that last one there? The redress of what?
Grievances.
Wait, would that be like to petition the government?
Yeah, to say, hey, you're outside your bounds, open the economy back up. Exactly. That's precisely what it's about. And the people in every instance I know of so far have not been violent whatsoever. They're certainly frustrated and and justifiably angered, but it's been peaceful assemblies. And yet you have the governor sending police out there threatening you. And one woman, she was put in zip tie handcuffs and led away. For what? For doing exactly what the Constitution says we have the right to do.
Right. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's why the right to peaceably assemble, though it seems like it would be just a small right, that it's not a big deal, that we should just go and surrender this for our own safety. I understand at surface. I mean, it's easy to think that that's the knee-jerk reaction. But the reality of it is that the founders put that in there tied to the idea of saying, hey, government, you got something wrong. And the government right now is saying, we're doing what's right for you. And you can't redress us. You can't go and address if you disagree with us, you can't go and petition us or protest us. And so we're right. You're going, well, you're not even allowing somebody to go and to make the case that you're wrong, government. And that's our First Amendment right. They're saying we're right because we're right, and you can't protest us because we're right. Well, that's not reason.
Come together.
Yeah.
You can't come together in mass, which is exactly what a protest is. It's a gathering of people in common cause to redress the grievances they have against government. This is exactly what they're doing. And now they're saying you can't do that because you can't come together due to our special orders. Well, your special orders, government, do not contradict or put themselves over the Constitution itself. That's the supreme law of the land. Everything else falls underneath it. Now, I know there's some people that are well-intentioned and would follow like, well, this is for our own good and all that. I understand that. And the government can make suggestions. They can. And even in churches that are still open, such as ours, the people can decide to stay home, and we certainly don't put any sort of blame on them that that's what they decide to do. They have to decide for themselves what they want to do. But to come out and say you cannot meet is wrong. It's immoral, and it is illegal by the Constitution. And there is no higher man-made document in our country than the Constitution.
That's right. Now, this is going to sound a little bit crazy because I just went and looked over at our notes. I think we're going to need a number 3. I think we're going to have
thinking that too.
Because we got quite a bit to go over. I was thinking, can we condense all this? And I don't think so. I think we're going to need to unpack it. So go ahead and go over to theshininglightministries.com, subscribe, because you're going to want to hear, if you haven't heard part 1, you're going to go back and hear part 1. And for sure, you're going to want to hear part 3 as we continue talking about the new normal that we're going to be facing with COVID-19 here in the coronavirus crisis. Anything you want to add as we sign off here and then record the third one?
Yeah, no, this is, when you view these things and you have time, I realize your time is precious, but you got more time, you're sitting at home. So it's funny that you're non-essential. Well, everybody's got a job. That job's essential, and everything that's going on in this country is essential. There's no such thing as non-essential people or non-essential jobs, and I don't like that term. But anyway, you'll be wanting to tune into part 3, because we're going to talk about things going forward, and we're going to talk about theological and eschatological, some of the implications here of what we're experiencing now and what they're putting forward is the cure for our problems.
That's exactly right. For the Shining Light Podcast, this is Pastor Sam.
And Patrick, no compromise with evil. Wyett.
I was wondering if you
Got
had
my
a last name. Don't get coughed on, and have a great day.
You hear him talking about evolution.